Hey guys, today we're going to talk a little bit about our collage project, and I figured the best way to do this is to show you guys visually what I'm looking for from you in terms of this project. So I'm going to start out with the things that I don't want to see from you for a digital collage. Um, so I've got some examples. Here's one of them. While this student's overall idea and concept was, I think, very good, his execution visually was not. So he's sort of trying to illustrate how smoking affected his life and some of the results of it, um, and some of the different aspects of it as well. So while that is, a very strong message, and some of his visuals are quite nice, the way he's composed this, I don't feel is a successful way of going about that. He's basically gridded this off using, I guess it kind of reminds me of a tic-tac-toe board, and it's just compositionally, it's not well arranged, and I don't feel that this is a very good means of communicating what he was trying to communicate. You could do multiple things with this to create something that's much more visually appealing and communicates the message a lot more effectively. So something like this, while the idea is good, the execution visually is not. And for our next one, this one, not a whole lot going on in terms of the idea or the story behind it. And also it's very busy. There's a lot of texture in this. There's really not a place where your eye can rest. And it's also got some odd things going on, like this wasn't masked out very well. There's an abrupt edge here that really kind of distracts you. Some of these peaks were painted in and not painted in very well. The one thing it does have going for it is it does have this, this little patterned creature here, which has its own problems. It's got a heavy texture on it that sort of sinks it into everything else. Not a good thing, but it's this repeating element that sort of your eye kind of wants to bounce back and forth to, but just quite can't do it because of how busy this is overall. So avoid something like that. Be aware of that as well as you go along. It's very easy to get something that's too busy. You may find it doing that, and you may have to pull it back just a little bit, or push it forward. It's a very give and take kind of thing. So here's another one. Not to knock scrapbooking, but this is very scrapbook-like. This isn't very artistic, even though it's got some overlay and some colors going on and some masking out here. This is not what we're looking for this project, so avoid things like this. Okay, let's actually look at some things that are almost there. I've got two that are almost what I was looking for. This one here is based around Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and there was an earlier version of this where objects stood out a bit more. Some of the type was more readable in places. There's actually a raven in here somewheres. If you can find it, that got knocked back and became almost invisible. Things like that. So this became a little too muddied. It doesn't communicate very well. It had this, it still retains that very kind of gloomy, Poe-esque kind of atmosphere to it, but just it became too muddied. A lot of the contrast left, and as a result, some of the elements just sort of disappeared. And like I said, there was a very nice image of a raven in here somewheres, and it's kind of gone, and it loses that intended story that they were trying to communicate because of that. Another one here, this one's, collages tend to lend themselves towards surrealist kind of stuff. This is definitely falling into that category. So it's kind of kooky, a lot of weird stuff going on. The main problem with this one is some of these elements, they just don't mesh together very well. It's very kind of cut and paste feeling. So a little more attention to trying to make things relate to one another a little better would have helped this piece quite a bit. So both of these are close, but just not enough attention given to them or patience in trying to figure out ways of balancing and getting it just right. Okay, so here's some good ones. This one worked out very well. He did a lot of work sort of blending things together, taking these black and white cityscape aerial views in the clouds and making them mesh together. It's got this very sort of comic book kind of feel to it down here. Some color overlays, playing with color, included a portrait of himself, and this was sort of the concept behind this was him very much being absorbed in life in the city. So it's this soup bowl, and it's sort of him getting ready to tip the soup bowl and partake of what it's like to live in the city and be a part of that type of a community. Our next one here, this one's very surrealist. I think a lot of this works very well together. Some things not so much. Like I would have taken this sign and had this sort of suspended from something somewheres. And it gets to be a little symmetrical or asymmetrical in places, almost a little too much so. But overall, I think this is very kind of kooky and an interesting arrangement. This one was based around wanting to see more of the world. The student did some traveling in between semesters, got to see a few places, and wanted to experience more of that. So this is sort of her tribute to her aspirations to travel more and see more and experience more in her lifetime. Very nice arrangement. It's got this very, starting to draw you in towards the center, towards the eye, perched on the globe. It's not dead center. If you'll notice that, the center of this, the focal point, isn't placed right in the middle of the image. It's a little off. So I think a nice way of communicating the story, and also a nice arrangement. It's another kind of surreal one. A lot of interesting stuff going on in terms of possible interpretations and meaning. I think very overall it's put together fairly well. Some of these things I would have softened up a little bit more, but just some interesting visuals that I found quite appealing for this piece, and the overall color palette I think works fairly well together as a whole. And a few more. This one sort of like a look on their life over the last couple years, making decisions on what they wanted to go to school for, their major, things like that. And they took things like Van Gogh, Starry Night, there's Nike's Wing over here, the Scream, some Dolly stuff, there's even Bob Ross up here in the corner. So very interesting arrangement in terms of how it can be interpreted, and I think put together very well as a composition as well. This one here is a very nice composition, sort of her tribute to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. I think on its, just on its own, this shape and how things mesh together and come together, sort of using the idea of a clock, and also road signs, and just a very nice composition. The unpainted roses, things like that. This one here is pretty cool. This is made entirely using a single jacket. This is just scans of different parts of a jacket. A few things like the little hikers here I think are from the tag. Same for the birds and other parts of this. And just a little bit of painting in between to bring things together. And then our last one here, this was created using scans of translucent things like colored plastic and bottles, some stones, and I think a few like free to use images from like the Hubble telescope and things like that, and even places that the student had gone to and visited. So I think this is a pretty interesting arrangement, sort of going, traveling up from the location into this sort of portal. Everything's being pulled towards it. So just kind of a cool arrangement. So hope that helps you guys, sort of gives you an idea of what I'm looking for from you in terms of where you should visually be heading with this project. And remember to try and tell a story with it. That's usually the best way to approach this. Try to communicate some sort of message, whether it's about your favorite book or part of your life or a moment in your life, things like that. Alright, so as always, if you have questions, go ahead and ask. You can always reach me by email, and I'll see you guys in class.